Welcome back to the What's Your One More podcast. I'm your host, Quentin Harris, and today I am joined with what I would consider to be a college funding consultant specialist. I'm very excited because the timing of this is just ideal. You know, we're in the hunt for college season right now, and it's exciting to have Brad Baldridge on the show. Brad, welcome to the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting. I know we've had to postpone this one a couple of times, so it's great to have you in here. And, for those of you who don't know Brad, I got to tell you what, he's a certified financial planner, college funding consultant, and chief podcaster at Taming the High Cost of College. He has over 25 years plus experience working with families and helping them with the college planning process, specifically in the late stage planning, where he seeks to significantly reduce their college costs. And he specializes in helping students into the admission process to their preferred school and realizing their college dreams. This is going to be an exciting one, Brad. I'm very excited about this topic matter because I have a 17-year-old, soon to be 16-year-old, and I'm surrounded by a bunch of parents that have the exact same thing going on. And we're in the hunt for college season right now. Applications are getting ready to be due. There's a lot going on, and this is kind of high stakes environment. This is where it gets real. You take kids and they start to become adults at this point. So you've been doing this for 25 years, and we were talking pre-show about some of the changes. We're going to get into it, but let's just kick it off. I have this question that's just burning in the back of my head here. How many families, percentage-wise, that you work with save enough for college?
Oh, it's a very small percentage. I would say, less than 10%.
Yeah.
I mean, and what does enough mean? That's another challenge, of course. But college has gotten so crazy expensive that most families, don't just have a big pile of money and they've got it all figured out. And certainly not the ones that seek me out and ask for help, right? I guess if you had a big pile of money and it was no problem, you probably weren't looking for someone like me then either.
Yeah, and someone like you is, 25 years ago, I got to imagine your services were so specialized that it was like, hey, have you heard of what Brad does? And today, you are sought after. Your services are required in the process. And I'm learning this as a father right now that, when I applied for school, there was no online. You fill out the application, you did the process, you turn it in, you hope you get the approval letter. It's a whole process now. It's a whole database. And it's quite overwhelming. And having a guide such as yourself is crucial in this process for applying for colleges. So let's start from the very beginning. What's the biggest mistake a parent like me may make, and when do we need to start? What do we need? When do we start engaging your services and in this process?
Right. So as soon as possible for most people, because by the time you're thinking about it, for most families, you're a little bit late already. So I encourage, and so let's talk about the timeline. So the timeline is there's what I would call early stage and late stage planning.
Okay.
So early stage planning is I've got a 2-year-old, or hey, we're pregnant, or whatever. And you say, well, maybe we should set up some sort of savings plan or talk about what our goals for college are. And that's all well and good. But then you get to what I would call late stage planning, which is you've got a high school kid, maybe freshman, sophomore, ideally. But most of the time, a lot of time I'm hearing from, juniors and seniors saying, oh my God, what are we going to do?
And is that more about
really
savings
late,
or is that more about the application process at that point?
Right. It's more about the application process. Exactly.
Gotcha.
So late stage planning is, you may have a big pile of money and you want to use it efficiently, or more likely you have a small pile of money or no money at all. And you're saying, now what are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And college is expensive and there's lots to do now. We're visiting, the student needs to figure out what they want to be when they grow up, and maybe they've got to do testing and applications and essays. And the parents need to get involved in, will we qualify for need-based aid and merit aid, and what's our budget, and how much do we actually have saved? And do we have an extra $1,000 a month for this, or $3,000 a month for this? Or what's our realistic budget? How are we going to be fair? We've got 3 or 4 kids. How's that all going to fit into, if I spend $50,000 or $100,000 on the first child, does that mean I have to spend the same amount on all of them?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to be fair? All that kind of stuff. And then there's the stuff that the families do together, where students and parents are typically visiting and doing college research and, again, trying to work together to make all this come together into hey, this is a good school at a good price. Students going to be happy there. They're going to launch, and it'll launch them and they'll be successful. I mean, that's the ultimate goal that all parents have, right? Is it's not any one thing per se, other than that broad category of great fit for them. They'll be happy there. And then in the end, it'll also be a good step in the right direction for wherever it is they're trying to go.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I'd like to break this into, kind of unpack that, break this into 2 categories. Let's start with the first one, which is 2 years old, early stage. Now we're saving, we're pregnant. Let's start there. I think for a lot of parents, that's the probably overlooked part, right? Because you say, we'll do it next year. You keep putting it off, and next thing you know, they're 16 years old. So let's start with what are some of the suggestions as a financial planner you have out the gate? Because traditionally speaking, we hear 529. Let's start there. Like, what's the best thing you recommend, or what are some steps that parents should take at that time?
Right. And so 529s are certainly a good option. We use them quite often, but oftentimes we pair them with other strategies, whether it's Roth IRAs or individual investments or bank account. And there's all kinds of different, so 529 is a good tool. It's not the only tool. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And, building that plan where it makes sense. But I think the other biggest challenge for most families is it's my bigger garage theory. I don't care how big your garage is, it's always full.
Okay.
Because in general, you don't think about downsizing or throwing something away or whatever until the garage is full.
Mm-hmm.
So, people have 1-car garages and they're frustrated, envy the 2-car garage people. And the people that have 2 cars say, well, I need 3. And the people that have 3 say, I need 4. It's the same happens with your income, right? As your income climbs, if you learn how to spend it before you learn how to save it, it's going to be a challenge. I've had families, with 17 and 18-year-olds earning $200,000 a year say, wow, college is expensive. There's no way we can fit this into our budget. And then the next person I talk to earns $100,000 and they say, college is expensive. I don't think we can afford it. But if I earned $200,000, it would be really easy, right? Right after I just talked to somebody who earns $200,000 that told me it's not easy.
Right.
So there is no magic. I think what happens, and how do we apply this to the early stage?
Mm-hmm.
Well, college is expensive and you're going to have to make some decisions and say, okay, well, right now we have daycare, so it's crazy expensive. We can't afford to save. So when daycare is over, then we'll save. Well, then you actually have to deliver on that.
Right.
When daycare is over, kids don't get cheaper, right? I mean, so first of all, kids never get cheaper. So save now if you can, but if you can't, make a plan that you have to stick to. But the reality of it is you're going to live in a smaller house because you want to spend money on college. You're going to have smaller vacations because you want to save money for college. Mm-hmm. And that's the reality, is you kind of have to get okay with that.
Yeah.
That
I agree.
If you're going to spend $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 someday when your kids have grown up and are off to college, either you save it now or you pay the price later. I mean, those are the options, right? And some combination of taking it out of current cash flow, saving it ahead of time, taking out loans and paying them off. And again, I have people that earn relatively decent living say, we can't afford anything. We're just going to take a bunch of loans. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If you can't afford anything, how are you going to pay these loans back?
Correct.
When you have no free cash flow, a loan is not a solution. It's just delaying the inevitable. It kicks it down the road. And that's where I think a lot of people get in trouble.
Yeah, no, I thought
so. When it comes to early stage, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to early stage, again, typically, a couple $100 a month might get you where you need to go per student starting day one. So when you have a 1-year-old, you start saving $200 a month, you'll have a decent pile of money by the time they're 18, assuming you put it into reasonable, investments and all that kind of stuff. And that could work to where maybe you have a third to a half saved. And then you can supplement that with, a lot of times you're in your peak earning years about the time the kids are, there's a lot of 45 and 50-year-olds that are, have their careers going pretty strong right now while the kids are going into school. So they may have a little extra cash flow. Again, if they've learned how to save it before they spend it, life is good. If you go out and buy new cars for all the kids and they get involved in private schools and all the sports teams they can get, and again, that's the reality, right? There's some families out there that are spending $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year on the kids for things that aren't even necessarily college, right? It could be private schools, could be the traveling volleyball team, could be the dance, the cheer, the gymnastics, all kinds of things that you can spend crazy amounts of money.
Yeah, this is a great topic because, here in Florida, and I know there's 14 states that do this. I think Florida probably, out of the ones I've researched, has one of the more unique ones, and one of the oldest ones is the prepaid. And not every state offers that, but there's a Florida prepaid here, which allows you to essentially, the day the child's born, lock in the tuition rate for that student at that time, which offsets any future inflation, cost, et cetera. You could buy up to 4 years worth of housing, technology fees. It's a pretty, and you compare it with a 529, just as what you said there. But I think the biggest thing is doing it.
Right. Absolutely. And, I'm not a big fan of those where you prepay. Mm-hmm. I've had a number, I've worked with enough families that have, don't live in Florida anymore. And they say, well, I've got a prepaid in Florida and my kid can go to Florida schools at a good price, but we're a long ways away from Florida now. So that's not so great, et cetera. So I like generally the more portable 529s in general. And there are exceptions, of course. But understanding what you're getting into is important. And then not all states' programs are as good as other states. And,
right.
That's not a knock on Florida. I think theirs is one of the better ones, but there's a couple of them that many of the states have gotten out of that because it was hard to manage it. It was hard to do. And then the other thing is college costs aren't going up as fast as they used to be. The states' budgets, a lot of the state schools were heavily funded by the states, which made them relatively low cost. And then the states modified their budgets and stopped paying for it. So that we had a very dramatic increase in the last 15 years. That may or may not continue because, again, when it went from the state pays 75% to the state pays 22%, well, again, the state may not reduce their piece as much now going forward.
Yeah.
And the prices are so high now that mathematically it's just not sustainable, right?
Price people out of the market.
People can't pay those even higher prices. So will it keep up with inflation? Perhaps. Will it go substantially more than inflation? Maybe. I don't know. But when you look back, it was double inflation or triple inflation. And the reality of it for college is, well, they raised the prices and we still, the students still came. So they raised the prices again and they still came. So why not raise prices?
Right.
Right. And that's,
well, academia
raised the price of the bag.
Yeah, academia became a very profitable business. They saw the cost. They said, "Let's do this," and it's a business any way you look at it. So in the early phases, it's really about making a budget and committing to it, and then doing it, making the sacrifices to do it, or just be prepared for what's going to happen towards the end here, because not everybody's going to get a scholarship. That's just not going to happen. So the reality is prepare now, and if you save now, you can also use that money for something later on if they do get the scholarship. It's there if you need it. So then we're in the late planning, and this is where you specialize. We're talking about the freshmen, we're talking about sophomore. You were saying juniors and seniors. I heard you say that, which I was just shocked when I heard that we're that deep in the game. So that process changes a little bit. You're saving, but now we got to start thinking about applying and applications and grades and everything. I mean, it just starts piling up at that point. So what advice do you offer to family members that are starting high school this year? I mean, school enrolls in a week and a half from now. This podcast will drop the day students start going to school. So freshmen, what do we offer for freshman families and their advice right now?
Right. Well, it's time to get to work as a parents of a freshman. So essentially, if you look at the timeline that colleges put out there, they have all their deadlines the senior year of high school. So the beginning of the senior year of high school is when you actually apply both for financial aid and admission. Okay. And then from there, you get accepted, they give you offers. And then by the end of the senior year, you've picked your school and you're off, and then through the summer, you go, right? You get organized, you pick your dorm, you pick your meal plan, you figure out your roommate and load the van and off you go. So there are no deadlines junior year or sophomore year, but that's when we need to prep.
Okay.
So that we're ready for the senior year. And most families don't, understand how complicated it could be. And I encourage families, as an example, to consider visits sophomore year, just to get your feet wet. Is it a hardcore? You got to figure out what college you want to go to? No, but the typical 15, 16, 17-year-old, when you say, do you want to go to a big school or a small school? They look at you and say, well, I don't know. I've not seen a big school or a small school. I don't know what we're talking about. So you might need to get out there and just show them around a little. And again, some students get on campuses because of sports or because of summer camps or whatever. And that, and that's good, but it's still not the same thing as a true visit where they, take you around to the dorms and show you things.
Right.
So just getting started earlier so you can spread that out, I think, is the key for a lot of families, where it's easy to put it off and ignore it till junior year. And then all of a sudden, they start talking about, well, you got to take these tests and that kind of stuff junior year. And then it gets real. Mm-hmm. And by that time, you're really in the thick of it. So again, a lot of times, and to be fair, there's a lot of students out there that really aren't ready to talk about college sophomore year and early junior year. They have some growing up to do.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean the parents can't do their piece, whether the student's ready or not. I've had parents say things like, well, we can't do anything because little Johnny can't figure out what major he wants. It's like, well, there's things you can still do, right? You can go visit a couple schools and look at a state school and look at a private school and look at something close and look at something far and something big and something small, so that they start having a frame of reference. And if you can't visit, well, then you got to do whatever you do instead of a visit, which would be, their online tours and information sessions and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because these schools would love to send information to you. I mean, they will mail you to death information. You just call and ask them.
Right.
They'll flood you with it.
Exactly.
And, and to your point, there's also tests that students can take, not tests, but it's like a personality assessment that tells them what lines of field that they might be interested in, so that they do kind of know where they're going in life and what their desires point towards. That way they can map themselves to the right degree in the right college. One of the things I read on your website prior to this podcast I thought was really good was, there seems to be this propensity where you were saying it earlier. You want to go to a big school, you want to go to a little school, and the parents want them to go probably to a big school in some cases, right? We want you to have that college experience. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the best school for that student. You said one of the biggest mistakes is people commit to a school because it's the big school. It's where they want to go, but that wasn't the best school for their degree. It wasn't the best school financially for them. And I loved reading that, and I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit on that as well for us.
Right. Well, I think, first of all, what you're really talking about is parental bias. I've seen it go both ways, right?
Sure.
I went to the big state university and I was in the stands cheering on our football team and I had a great time. Okay. But that isn't necessarily what your student wants to do. It might be, and that would be a great fit. But I've also had parents say, well, I went to that small liberal arts school and it changed my life. Oh, okay. Right. So everybody's had, there's been a lot of positive experiences at a lot of colleges. And that's one of the reasons college is so expensive, is there's a whole lot of parents out there that say, college changed my life. College was fantastic. I want to give that to my kids. Well, it's very expensive. Okay. Well, I'll sacrifice what it takes to make it happen. And as long as we have that attitude, right? Harvard can charge any number they want. And there's enough wealthy people that will just say, I'll write the check and make it happen.
Right.
Not all colleges can do that, of course, but that's what's going on. And there's also a lot of politics around, college isn't expensive just because they're out gouging us. That's far from true. We're also saying all these colleges need to have mental health, and they need to have, physical health, and they need to have a full-time police force to keep our kids safe. And parents like all that, except for they don't want to pay for it, right? I mean, yes, I want to have a police force that makes sure that kids aren't doing stupid stuff. But then when it comes to, well, then we need to have somebody run it, and then we got to have some administrators administer it, and then we got to do it fair so we're not sued, and it's very complicated and takes a lot of work. And then they put that on the bill,
right? Yeah.
And we're unhappy. But so again, there's a lot of, once you dive into the weeds, it's not so simple as to say, well, there's just a bunch of overpaid administrators making this expensive. Well, there are a bunch of administrators. Whether or not they're overpaid is a different question,
right.
And the various laws and rules require them now.
Yeah.
So if we don't like that, let's change the rules.
But
so anyway,
that goes back to your thing. Go tour the schools. Go see which one's the right one for you. Go to the big school,
right, exactly.
Go to the medium-sized school, go to the little school. Check them all out, and it's something that it's worth the road trip. It's a fun time, and it even lightens your eyes as a parent. You have here I am I'm wearing my college shirt for you today. I'm wearing my alma mater, and so I have a bias, right? Because of my alliance to where I went, right? How dare my daughter think she's going to the University of Florida? However, if she's lucky enough to get in there, I'm going to cheer them on and let her have and be the biggest Gator dad you've ever seen. And I'm going to catch flack for saying that on here, by the way. But the reality is, all of my Tennessee people are going to just strike me down for that one. But it's reality. If you contribute to the school, you're a part of it at that point. But that bias, that parental bias is really, really a thing, because I see that with a lot of parents right now. And I think sometimes, here definitely over in the Southeastern Conference, football is a way of life, then basketball, and it goes on. So we also start programming our kids at a very young age with that, right? And that bias rolls deep in there. And so, I think one of the things that as a parent I'm having to come to grips with is that, maybe my daughter does go to Florida, but my son may go to a much smaller school, and that might be the fit for him. You're really, at the end of the day, we want what's best for our children. We want them to have a path towards success. What we don't want them to do is drowning in debt because they chose that path. And,
right.
I've been doing lending for over 22 years, and I've seen students buried. I mean, just buried. And they're not even they're not even having a job that complements their degree. And you look at this, and it's almost a no way out on those student loans. Those things are treacherous. And, one of the things that I really want to take some time to talk about on here is there are good student loans that are there to help you and that will give you just enough to complete college, but not overpay you with this extra money to do with as you may. I've seen that with a lot of student loans too. And you were mentioned earlier, FAFSA is changing their updating, if you may, or changing their guidelines for the application process. So what's your recommendation to a family that can't stroke that check right away? Student loans are going to have to be a part of this equation to get to school and back. What loans do you recommend out the gate that students should start looking for that may not be income-based, or they may be income-based, but your expert advice there?
Right. So, certainly there's the two federal programs that the typical 18-year-old rolling out of high school, going off to college, they're eligible for the direct student loan. So that's the loan to the student paid back by the student. Now, the student can borrow $5,500 as a freshman, $6,500 as a sophomore, and $7,500 as a junior and senior.
Okay.
You look at that and say, well, the most expensive privates are $80,000. $5,500 is a drop in the bucket. And that's absolutely true. So, but that's all a typical student can borrow in their name without mom and dad being involved.
Okay.
And I think that's one important thing to realize is there is an adult in the room, hopefully, that's making these decisions. A student can't borrow $100,000 for an undergraduate degree all by themselves.
That's correct.
Mom or dad need to be co-signing, or mom and dad could be borrower, which leads us to the next loan, which is the PLUS loan, which is a loan to the parents paid back by the parents. The student's not involved.
So it doesn't go on the student's credit at all at that point. It's just mom and dad's credit. It has nothing
to do with them.
Okay, and that's called the PLUS.
So mom and dad, and this is what happens when planning fails and you get all the way to the end and you say, oh my God, this school is $50,000 and we have nothing saved, but they're offering us this PLUS loan and we just sign here and it's taken care of. And that works, of course. Parents and a lot of parents end up signing because they feel like, well, we didn't do this well and it's not the kid's fault, it's our fault. Yeah, so we're going to take the hit.
It's a guilt signature.
And which, again, is probably true. But the point being is the PLUS loan, the maximum PLUS loan is cost of attendance minus any other aid. So you get accepted to Harvard, $85,000. If you don't get any aid, the student borrows $5,000 and mom and dad borrow $80,000. Done. It's covered. It's not not what I'm recommending, but right. It works and it can be a last ditch effort. So then we circle back around to, well, how much should we spend on college? And that's where, for most families, what you might want to do is get an idea of what it would look like at your local state school.
Okay.
And again, if you've got the top student, then what's your top school? So what's your top state school, right? Like Florida's got a lot of state schools and some of them are highly competitive and not realistic for some students. So don't use that school. Use one that's realistic.
You're right.
And the big states are all like that. California, Texas, they all have really top-notch schools. And then they have schools for the masses too. So
that's a great way of putting it, by the way.
Understand what I just said, figure that out, and then find the appropriate schools for your student.
Yeah, and I think if you live in your state, you know exactly what we're talking about here. Top tier school, and then the one for the masses, right? And by the way, the one for the masses, it's a great school.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. I want to be abundantly clear with that, but it's the path that you're going to have to figure out works financially for you, and more importantly for your student. And and as an employer in the job market, very rarely in my field do I hear people go, "Oh wow, they graduated from here. We got to hire them." I think the days of that. Now you may find an allegiance to them because you're like, "Oh hey, go Vols, go Gator, whatever," and you find that allegiance, but it doesn't mean you're going to hire them because of that. There's so many other traits that go into that the school now is not, and I don't know if this is right, but the school is not it doesn't pop off the resume like it used to. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. And well, in some cases it never did, and in other cases it always does, right? So there's a few of those clubs, right? If you want to be president of the United States,
there you go.
You probably want to go to the Ivy League if you can, because it'll just make you'll make the right connections and it'll just make your life a little easier. If you want to be a lawyer in where I live here in Milwaukee, you could probably go to Marquette Law School and do just fine. Right. So that's, one of the challenges, right, is what's appropriate, and do those names carry weight. But when's the last time you went, to your doctor's office, and then whoever, the nurse or whatever, is taking you back, and you say, well, where'd you go to school? Right. Oh, you went there? Well, never mind. Get away from me.
I'm walking out. I'm done.
That's somebody else over here. You went to the wrong school. Yeah. It doesn't happen, right? Most of us don't care. And it really only matters potentially for your first job. Right. And then there's these clicks, right? You can get on Wall Street a little easier if you go to the right business schools, and you can get to Silicon Valley a little easier if you go to the right tech firms. And and there's a grain of truth to it. But the reality of it is, you can get a lot of places with hard work. Doesn't necessarily have to be at this particular school or that school. So any school will do. But when you talk about state schools, so the average state school costs $27,000 all in. So that's tuition, room and board, books, fees, beer, and pizza. The whole cost for a typical student
4 years
for 1 year.
1 year, 27 grand in 1 year.
Right.
It's gone up a little bit.
The average private school costs $57,000.
Okay.
Now, both of these are the list price, though. And at both public and private schools, you'll get some scholarships potentially. You'll get some need-based aid. You'll get some merit aid. You'll get the loans and that kind of stuff. So if you look at a state school, you start with $27,000. You knock off some of that is books and travel and and personal expenses that are already being paid, or maybe the student could just, student has to earn enough to pay for their own pizza and their own whatever, right? So there's a certain amount the student can earn. Then the student can borrow $5,500. So maybe a student can earn $45,000, borrow $55,000. So $10,000 off $27,000 is down to $17,000.
Okay.
But, so that mom and dad would have to pay if you don't qualify for any aid.
Or they get
or
they get the plus loan that you described. Okay.
Or get the plus loan. Now, $17,000 is reasonably affordable for people that don't get any. Your income is going to be $100,000 plus probably. Once you have low income, they start getting things like Pell Grants and other things where at the very low incomes, there's extra aid. So now it might cost $5,000 or $6,000 out of the parent's pocket. Now, again, $5,000 or $6,000 when you're low income hurts a lot. And $25,000 when you're at $150,000 hurts a lot. And then when you start going to the private schools, the $50,000 or the $80,000 when you earn $300,000 a year hurts a lot.
Whole lot. Yeah.
And that's kind of the way it's been designed, right? They kept raising the prices until it hurt so much people started saying no, and then they started backing off, right? And that's supply and demand kind of things, right?
Yes,
So it's going to hurt everybody. So the real question, kind of becomes, if you're giving up the lake home in order to pay a lot of crazy money on college, that's one thing. But if you're destroying your retirement, or you're going to go deep in debt, and you're going to be these people that can't get mortgages because they've got this student loan around their neck, if that's where you're going, well, then maybe you should spend crazy amounts. And there's always the caveat, right? There's a certain group of the population. Another thing that drives me crazy is, college for everyone, or we should do this, as treating everybody as this big monolithic, group, right? But here's the reality, right? There's students out there that are going to do fantastic no matter what they do. They can borrow crazy amounts of money. They'll figure out how to make money and pay it off, and that they're just going to be successful no matter what happens. The other end of the spectrum is there's these kids that just really probably shouldn't even go to college. It's not going to benefit them much. School of Hard Knocks is probably the better place for them. But where we can really make the difference, I think, is that group in the middle,
right,
where it's not a foregone conclusion that there are, any path to success, and the kids that science teacher in 10th grade, he, got me hooked on this, and then I got interested in engineering, and that just changed my life. Or I went to this liberal arts school, and it expanded my mind so much. I started thinking differently, and I used that as ideas to launch a business or whatever. I mean, that's where you hear that type of stuff,
right?
Where, it can be transformative, but it doesn't have to be crazy expensive to be transformative either. There's a lot of schools at a lot of different price points. And just because one is ranked 7 spots higher on some ranking doesn't make it better.
No.
There's a lot of good paths and a lot of good directions that families can go. And people are looking for the shortcut though. So they go to the rankings, they say, this one's ranked high. Let's just apply to this one. And then we're off to the races. And then at the end, they say, oh my God, it's crazy expensive. And that's where, again, putting the time and the effort, you're going to pay for college with money, but you're also going to pay for it with time and stress.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, would it be smarter for the student and the parent to parent at this point and give some advice and say, hey, listen, let's go in at these schools that you're liking, right? That you're just gravitating toward, it's the must have. And if you get in, we get in. But let's also go in with a couple of, 4 or 5, what's the number, backup plans in there that are a little bit more diversified in the range of cost and experience. And let's put a plan and let's apply for all of them. Like how many colleges would you recommend in that rod, like diversifying your application process, almost like a portfolio at that point?
Right. Yeah. I encourage families, and again, it depends on the student, right? Okay. All of these things are always, well, they're really, but if there's, again, you're going to the low cost state schools and you already know, you're not going to get much aid, but the prices are already low to begin with, or you're going to the local tech colleges or that type of stuff where the numbers are low, then maybe you don't have to apply to, 2 or 3 your low number.
Okay.
But if you're going to apply to 10 schools where you're not even likely to get accepted, now you have to apply to 5 more where you will be accepted or where you're at least confident, have some confidence, right?
Sure.
If you apply to Harvard, Yale, so forth and so on, you still need to have your backup schools or however, different ways that you want to talk about it, right? So nothing wrong with applying for those reach schools, but the same can be said around the financial side of things, right? So you take a kid that can get accepted to Notre Dame, let's say, or some other relatively name brand school, they're going to be academically pretty strong.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, they're going to qualify for merit aid at a lot of other schools that maybe don't have the cachet. So they might be able to go to a Marquette here in my town, or again, and there's many schools out there, University of Denver, whatever, and might get a scholarship for $25,000 or $35,000. And then that same student might qualify for the Presidential Honors Scholarship, where there's 7 of them at this particular college, where their tuition is $0 and their room and board is half price.
Yep.
Now, the school that they get that at doesn't have the prestige, right? You could just barely get accepted at Notre Dame. It doesn't mean you're a bad student. That means you're a good student because that's all they take.
Right.
Right. And you're a fantastic student compared to your peers at some of these other schools. But the price is nearly $0, right? So all schools, not all, but many, many, many schools have a certain number of people on campus where they've got endowed scholarships of some sort, or they've got some sort of process where, hey, here's a bunch of kids that are going for free.
Right.
Or nearly free. They're getting a great deal. And they're, 2 cuts above the average student at that school. And that's true until you get to the top schools. When you get to the Harvards and Yales, well, everybody there is a rock star. So then they say, you know what? We don't offer merit aid at all. Everybody here is fantastic. So the schools at the top don't offer any merit aid. So I have a lot of parents say, well, my student applied to this school and that school and this school, and they didn't get any aid at any of them. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, they got accepted. Consider yourself lucky because they were never going to give you aid as far as academics. It was all based on the need-based process.
Right.
So if you were needing to get scholarships, well, you set yourself up for failure because they were never going to do that.
Yeah.
Now, these schools over here, they might have great scholarships. So it's understanding it's not just the list price, it's the net price.
Well, and it goes back to that supply demand. These places have a limited amount of supply, the ones you just named. So there's going to be a high demand and they know it and they charge what they want for it and they get it, until they can't go any higher, and that's a common thing.
And again, but on the flip side, Stanford just announced that any family that earns less than $100,000, tuition and room and board will be $0. It'll be free.
Because they have an endowment.
They got billions.
Billions.
And if you're under 150,000, then tuition will be $0.
Wow.
And then, right. So based on that, if you can get into Stanford, price will be fantastic. And that's true of most of the elite schools. It'll be fantastic relative to the need-based aid at other places, right? So they're always very generous. So if you need aid at these schools, it'll work out fantastic. It's where trying to find that balance of, well, if I'm not going to show a need, if your family earns $500,000 a year, or $2 million a year or something, or has a lot of assets or whatever, and you're not going to get aid anywhere. Well, Harvard looks at you and says, you can afford to pay and you will pay. And if you say, well, I don't want to pay, well, that's a different question,
right?
Right? I don't want to pay $85,000. Well, then look at schools where you won't have to, because the's plenty of kid that can get into Harvard can get into a lot of schools,
right? No.
And there's many of them that won't charge $85,000.
So let's talk a little bit about COVID and what it did to the universities. A theme that we saw happen here specifically in our state is that COVID happened. We did the virtual learning off campus, or students were on campus, but they weren't in the classroom. And there was this disenchantment of, hey, why in the hell am I paying these costs to go to this school, to sit in a dorm, to do virtual learning, when I can go home and I can do an online learning with this same university at a much cheaper cost? And you kind of saw a migration pattern that happened there. Some of these universities heavily depend on that enrollment fee for their budgeting. They heavily depend on everything you described earlier for budgeting purposes. And we saw budgets get completely out of whack during COVID. I sit on a foundation board for a local university here, and we saw it, right? We saw it happening, and and because it's a state school, we got to see the other state schools, and we saw it happening. And then what we saw to offset that, and I don't know if this is a national trend, and you're going to be the expert here, was this it was almost like the gates opened. Come one, come all. And there was a lot of acceptance that took place over the course of 2021, late 21, or mainly 2022. Massive. Students got in that wouldn't normally get in based on the parameters you just described. And there was this influx. Well, then this year, an application process that started, and the gates were closed. And a lot of students that would normally have gotten into these universities that met all the criteria and then some, well, they didn't get in. Is that a pattern you saw around the country, or was that Florida specific?
Oh, no, that was a pattern around the country. So people need to realize, that colleges are a business, right? They have a payroll to meet, and they need to have $22 million come in because they're going to have $22 million go out. And if that's not going to be the case, they have to reduce headcount, just like any other business. And people forget that. And a lot of schools are tuition driven. And what that means is they don't have hundreds of millions or billions sitting around in case they can't balance the budget. They may have an endowment, but they have very specific rules on how they can tap it and what's available and that type of thing. So,
and that's pretty much every university for the most part.
Exactly. And universities are closing. I mean, they're just, especially on the lower end, so to speak, they're just not drawing enough students, and they just can't balance the budget. They can't make it work. And so that, and we're going to see more of that, I think. But the other important thing to realize is that less than half of the students that go to college these days or attend college, and they're not necessarily even going per se, they could be doing it from home. But less than half of current students are the typical 18-year-old on the campus type of student.
Okay.
More than half are adult learners and online learners and all these other different things. So, and in the adult area, we've seen a lot of innovation around, they provide weekend labs or whatever, right? So you study during the week at home, and then you go on a Saturday to do your in-person stuff, or it's all online, or it's all these various things, right?
Yeah, a lot of adaptations.
So there's lots of creativity, right? And a lot of these people say, I don't really care about the football team. Show me where I'm going to study, or, so it's a different process, right?
Right.
But there's still going to be that residential community as well. But it's not the only path. And it's starting to become a little more real where, again, you need to have an education, in my opinion, right? You're going to need something as you move out into the world, whether it's apprenticeships or a true 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, something, or even, again, the school of hard knocks. I'm not saying you can't learn on the job. Go launch a business and figure it out.
Right.
All those things work. But I think that's the challenge of not everybody is cut out for the 4-year degree, and then not everybody is going to go live on a campus and do it the way we've always done it.
Right.
And colleges are struggling with that, where they're slow to change. And, and again, a few are going to collapse under it. But other schools are talking about things like, well, why 4 years? Let's try 3 years and see how that works.
Interesting.
And they're not just taking 4 years of material and squeezing it into 3 years. They're redesigning it from the ground up and just saying, we're going to do things differently. There's schools out there that are very tied into their community, and they require everybody to take a semester off and go to work somewhere. Every single graduate has had 2 or 3 internships by the time they graduate.
Okay.
Where they've been out in the real world. And many employers say, wow, that's great. Because I think a lot of students need to be in the real world. Because when they come here right out of school, they are really clueless.
I could see that.
Right. We've heard, again, okay, boomer, I guess is what they say. Right. But anyway, but that's the challenge, right? Is it's evolving and parents need to keep up and understand how it fits with your family.
So a theory here that I subscribed to for quite some time, and I could be wrong, was I had the essentially the president of a university that another local university, it was private, lived across the street from me, and he said, Quentin, academia, and this was around 2011. He said, Quentin, academia has changed dramatically. The 4-year degree is so diluted right now on purpose that the 4-year degree you got is not the one that's being given today. And I mean that with all due respect. He said, but what we've done is that academia as a community, we have found a way to make that 5th year. If you can graduate in 4, because sometimes the course curriculum is designed to where you can't get that in 4 unless you go to summer school, right? He said, but we've made it where that 5th year, we're now calling it the MBA program. We can get it done in 1 year. And our goal is to get that student through to where we can go, yeah, but if you stay 1 more year, you'll have your MBA. And he said, we wanted to make it as seamless as possible to tack on that extra 3 letters there. And he goes, and then we've gone a step further and we've escalated that doctoral program. We can get that done in 18 months. And he goes, and that is all part of this new age budget that we were pursuing. I see you smiling as I'm saying this. I'm sure you see this a lot in the college aspect. In your opinion, is that a slippery slope, or is that something that, I mean, I know it's different for each student, but is that a slippery slope to dilute that, to get to that level, to get that extra budgetary number there?
Yeah. Well, again, and that's where I think where some schools really are a little more careful about protecting their long-term reputation.
Okay.
Right. So, I mean, in this day and age, you can get through high school with not knowing how to read.
That's so scary.
Right. That's the truth.
Right.
And then there's probably a few universities where you can go on and get your degree and continue to be, a relatively poor student and then ultimately be a poor worker.
Mm-hmm.
So then the employers start to get jaded and say, well, kids that come from there, there's no rigor there. So they're not really learning anything. They just get the degree. Right. So it's not unusual for, you look at the broader picture, right? Somebody that's been working 10 years says, I want that job. And they say, well, you got to have a degree to get that job. So they say, okay, well, how do I get a degree? Not how can I go learn something? All they really want is a piece of paper that says I can have that job.
Right.
And they want to do it cheap and easy. And if they don't learn anything, they don't care. Well, so you're going to pay a lot of money to not learn. That seems, right. When you say it out loud like that, it seems ridiculous. But you take this typical 19-year-old. I mean, I've got kids in college. They love it when classes are canceled. It's like, well, wait a minute. We paid for those classes. You say, yeah, but they cancel the classes and then they don't have to do as much work and it's easier. And okay, yeah. So you don't learn anything. So that's your goal, is to get a piece of paper and not learn a thing. Well, and then they start to think about it, right? But again, the typical 18, 19, 20-year-old is like, it's not fair that I had to work so hard and someone taking a different section got that instructor, and that instructor doesn't require anything. That instructor doesn't teach you anything either, but that's not the point. The point is it's so easy over there. How come I have to work so hard?
Right.
Well, that's a good thing, probably. But, students don't see it that way. Yeah. And that's where all these quandaries are out there, right? Is, am I after the degree or am I after the knowledge? And then if I have the knowledge, can you just give me the degree? Right. If I can go pass the bar exam, can I be a lawyer? I know I got the knowledge. I can answer all the questions just like a lawyer could. Well, usually the answer is no. You have to have the degree to go with it. Mm-hmm. Why? Well, it's that balance of we got to protect the law degree. We can't let everybody have it. Then it'll get so diluted that it won't have any value.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of stuff going on where the successful want to protect their fiefdoms. But there's also things like you can go to Google and get Google certified and take get training in the various Google advertising and whatever. And those certifications carry almost as much weight as some college degrees in computer science, as an example.
Yeah. No, I could completely see that. Something else.
So it's all over the map. I think what's important is to realize that it's up to it's up to parents now to be the wise shopper and pay attention to, well, what is it we're getting for our money, and what are our goals, right? Is that our student needs to grow up, our student needs to learn a certain trade, right? There's a lot of majors out there where if you get this major, you get this job. And if you want that job, you got to have that major, right? I mean, elementary ed teaching, right? You take an elementary ed degree, you're qualified to become an elementary ed teacher, and they go hand in hand. And you're not going to break that much. What degree do you need to be a MRI salesman or to close tech deals, with corporations that are going to spend $200,000 on a software package? What degree does that person need?
Right.
Well, they need to be good at sales, and they can have any degree. And and again, that's where a lot of the history majors ended up, or a lot of the kids, the kids that were going to be successful no matter what degree they took. Well, that's what they did, is they took some degree, whatever.
Interesting.
Learned a little bit about life and were successful.
There's quite a few schools that are starting to implement the sales degree. That, to your point,
right.
They're starting to implement that. And, it's I know a teacher that our professor, I should say, who's actually wrote the curriculum and is instituting it right now at the University of Florida for exactly what you're saying, because they had so many alumni come by and say, hey, I would like to contribute to your college, to the College of Business, but I'm looking for salespeople. And if you can find them for me, then I'm interested. And it just kind of sparked this notion. And they've done a really good job developing that over there. And so have other schools I'm aware of, this one in particular, but other schools are doing it as well. So hey, here's a question that has just popped into my head as we're talking here. So college applications, you're applying. What's the threat of AI in the college application process, especially on the the essay part? What's the threat of that in this process here early on in this stage?
Yeah, well, there is some ability to detect it, and they're trying to clamp down on it and say, thou shalt not do it, which is very short-sighted, in my opinion, again.
Sure.
But, I mean, here's the reality. When you're the boss and you say, I need you to write, 700 words that's going to sell this widget, and then you go to the boss and say, well, I could use AI and have it done in 20 minutes, or I could sit over there and work on it for 3 days. What do you prefer?
Sure.
The boss is going to say, go use AI.
Yeah.
Right?
As long as it's accurate, go use it.
Right. I mean, you could argue, this has been going on since they invented, forever, probably.
Right.
But when they invented the calculator, should you be allowed to take a calculator to a math test? That seems unfair. Well, obviously, to this day and age, you certainly can and are required to show up with calculators at most of the math, because that's the reality. Is we want you to use the tools that are available.
Yeah, no TI
where
left
AI
behind.
as a tool is going to fit in. 5 years, 10 years from now, it's going to be, we're going to look back on it like the argument over the calculator or the argument over word processing, right? The fact that Word will tell me, oh, that's the wrong there. It should be spelled the other there, and just changes it for me. Well, I wish I had that when I was in college.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I didn't, and I got that wrong. But everything kind of advances. So in the short term, yes, there's a lot of how are we going to deal with it and issues. In the long run, it's just one more thing on the pile.
Yeah, and, understood. So hey, as we kind of wrap up and head towards the end of these questions that we got here, here's one that's kind of, I want to make sure the audience walks away with a couple of hits here. What's the biggest mistake parents are making right now? I
mean, again, the just do it, start early,
commit.
Don't procrastinate, get after it. Okay. I think especially in the late stage of, and we didn't talk much about this, but when you fill out financial aid, as an example, it's based on taxes that you filled out starting your sophomore year.
Okay.
So you got to start thinking about what's going to be on my taxes and how's that going to impact college freshman year and early sophomore year. You can't start thinking about it junior and senior year, because what you're going to discover is, the taxes that they're going to look at are already done and filed, and nothing I can do to fix them.
Right.
I wish I would have known that. So those kind of things.
Be smart about your filings, right? Take as many of the deductions as you can. If you don't need a home loan and you don't need to show it to a lender, get really in there with your CPA and get as much deducted to get that number down, is what you're saying.
Right.
That's
exactly.
a solid piece of advice.
Right. Exactly. And there's lots you can do from predicting your financial aid. If we do this instead of that, financial aid will be different.
Okay.
Both federal aid and college scholarships. So there's a lot of we did a lot of high level stuff. There's a whole lot of tactics where you can say, you know what, if I save for retirement this way instead of that way, it'll save on taxes. It'll make financial aid turn out better. It's a win-win across the board. And so then you probably would want to do it. And there's just a gazillion tactics. So, I mean, we could talk about that for hours and hours and hours. And the challenge is some tactics, if you're a business owner, you've got opportunities that other people don't have. If you've got an athlete, you've got opportunities that other people don't have. So there's the core planning. And then there's all the complications like divorce and blended families and inheritance and multiple kids in college and, on and on. Right. So, this is the starting point for most people. It's not, okay, well, I'm glad I learned all that. I'm done now. No, now what you've learned is you've got hours and hours of learning ahead of you.
Yeah. I think just for our audience perspective, we pre-show Brad goes, hey, I don't know how much time you have. And I'm like, well, you're our guest, 45 minutes to an hour. I mean, as much as you want. And he chuckled. He goes, well, I think what we're going to talk about today is about 7 hours worth of stuff. So that's why, I have 150 plus episodes of my podcast, he said, and I'm still not done. So perspective wise, and we're going to tell the audience where they can go to listen to that podcast and also your services. We're barely touching the surface here. We're just trying to get the thoughts going so that you can go, okay, crap, I'm in the late phase or I'm in the early phase. And okay, I know I need to start saving, but whoa, I need to reach out to Brad or someone like Brad immediately for where I'm at here. And that's kind of where we are. And then maybe we are doing the shock thing to scare you a little bit just to get you going, whatever it takes. But the reality is it's going to sneak up on you. And to his point, it's you need someone to help guide you through this path. You mentioned earlier, are there any bad loans? I mean, at the student loan level, are there any loans people should avoid and not look at?
Right. Well, yeah. And I guess we didn't finish that discussion, but we talked about the federal loans, and they're the loans to beat. Okay. People with great credit can go to the private loan sector and go to a private student loan or get a home equity line of credit or all kinds of different ways.
Okay.
And beat those interest rates and come up with better terms and conditions.
Okay.
But if you're not a strong borrower, then the private community will often have terms and conditions that are awful, right? I mean, you've probably have heard about or seen, the student loan at 9% or 12% or awful. Something that's, predatory in most people's opinions. And you look at that and say, well, they could have just gone and got the plus loan at 8%, but they somehow got this 12%. How did that happen? Again, we don't know exactly, but that's the reality, right? So yes, there are definitely bad loans.
Yeah. And most of these loans are variable rate, correct? Most student loans are variable.
Some of them are variable. Well, so all the federal loans are fixed again.
Okay. That's great.
In that, but they're fixed every year. So you get a batch of loans your freshman year, they're fixed at whatever interest rate they are. You get a new batch your sophomore year, and whatever the current interest rates are, you lock in those at that rate. So you'll have a bunch of loans, a bunch of different rates.
Yes, all the students in 2019 through 2021 got great rates on their federal loans.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right. When interest rates were low, student loans were great. Now they've risen quite a bit. Student loans are still at a decent rate. I think and this is available on my website, but I think it's 5.5% for the student and about 8% for the parents on the federal loans.
Right.
And this is loans that for kids that are starting college coming up this fall.
Right. And to your point.
And we don't know what they will be any year following. Yeah. So
another quick tip, and I imagine this is probably in your bag of tricks because you've got a lot of them here. I've been reading on the website, but that student you mentioned earlier that can go get that 5.5 right now, but they're only lendable up to a certain amount, as you explained. Maybe it's lack of credit, income, whatever. There's some things you can do to position that student to be a strong credit borrower out the gate that may get more than that $5,000 allotment we were talking about. It may position them, getting their credit built up at an early age, and then also maybe even having them have some sort of income, whether it's coming in through a business you own or something of that nature. You could position them to where they could get more money than just the $5,000 that we talked about earlier, correct?
Well, yeah. Well, again, there's a lot of free aid in the work study, but generally students, just are not going to be able to borrow more in their name without parent co-signing.
Okay.
But again, if that's where we're at, it's really not based on the student's credit, it's based on the parent's credit.
Okay.
So a parent can kind of lend their fantastic credit rating and their strong income to the student by saying, you sign up for the loan, it's your loan, but I'll co-sign it.
Okay.
Well, from a underwriting perspective, they're just looking at the parent.
Gotcha.
And realizing that the parent's going to be the backstop. And if the student doesn't pay, we'll go after the parent or grandparent, or whoever's co-signing.
Okay.
But why people would go to that would be, again, that loan is in the student's name. So it looks like their loan. when the bills come, they come to the student, whereas the PLUS loan is in the parent's name and there's no way to shift it to the student.
Gotcha.
It's forever in the parent's name. You can finance it and shift it to the student, but the student has to qualify then for that kind of loan, which means they're out and working and building a strong credit rating and are able to take it over from a full underwriting perspective. You can't just say, I want to sign it to the kid now because I don't want to deal with it. It doesn't work that way.
Is there any way to avoid income-based repayment loans from a student's perspective?
Pay the bill.
Okay.
Don't borrow. I mean, that's right. I mean, the income-based repayment is the federal system.
Yep.
So you can skip the federal system and go directly to the private system, but now you need mom and dad's, and then it's like shopping for a mortgage or a boat loan, right? There's all kinds of opportunities out there. Some of them are teaser rates. When you actually, dive into it to try and get the loan, you realize, they said 2%, but really it's 4.5% by the time they went through my credit and everything.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, I think, is just like anything else. They put the teaser rate out there and, there's laws that they have to give it to somebody, but that somebody's got the perfect credit score and the perfect repayment and high income and everybody else gets something that much worse than that. So there's that game that goes on, especially in the private student loan markets of, on the fringes. But I think as we're wrapping up here, the important thing to realize for parents is the game has changed. You mentioned very early on, and all this stuff wasn't like this when I did it. And that's absolutely true, right? I mean, the way parents did college, there wasn't a lot of help, but now there are lots of people out there that help, right? There's people that help students choose majors and what do they want to be when they grow up and write essays and fill out applications and choose colleges and all that kind of stuff. And then there's people like me that tend to focus on helping the parents. Mm-hmm. How are we going to pay for this? Are we going to qualify for aid? How do we avoid tax? Can we avoid taxes while paying for college? How to make this all come together, from a financial standpoint, and again, and we talk about choosing colleges because it has a financial impact, but
right.
If you said, can you help my student write an essay? It's like, no,
yeah, that's
not my skill set. Yeah. I know people like that. And I've got a number of people I can refer you to, but for a lot of people, the experts are out there now. It's just, how do you find them? Again, then that's my biggest challenge, right? Is people don't know I exist. So they don't come and find me as easily as they could. It's, another analogy, if your student came to you and said, I'd love to learn how to play the piano. And you say, oh yeah, I would agree. Your first thought isn't, I'm going to go learn how to play the piano so I can teach my student how to play the piano, right? You're going to say, whoa, we can hire that old lady. We think of that old lady with the ruler standing over the piano where the kids practicing. Well, I'm thinking that's old school too, right? Because I'm sure you can learn piano online.
Right.
Whether it's online with somebody where you're actually, Zoom, playing the piano together, or whether it's online lessons at a low cost, there's lots of options.
Sure. And
that's where, colleges become, I offer a course. I've got a lot of free materials. I do work with families one-on-one as well. And there's a lot of other experts out there that do the same. Again, courses that help students write essays or whatever it might be. And of course, all this knowledge is written down and put in books. If you want to go read books about it, right?
No, absolutely.
But, keep it a secret. Put it in a book.
That's right. That's a good one. So, hey, if our audience does want to learn more about this, like you said, they maybe have not been able to connect to you yet. What's the best way for them to find out more about what your services are, what you offer? Obviously, tune into the podcast, Taming the Higher Cost of College. But your website, some information about you, Brad. Where can they find you?
Yep. Again, tamingthehighcostofcollege.com is my website, and podcast by the same name wherever podcasts are sold, as they say. But at the website, there are free resources that you can click. There's a phone number there if you want to call. You can click through and schedule appointments. You can sign up for our newsletter and start getting information sent out to you on a regular basis. Can kind of remind you to keep working at this, and whatever works for you. And we're out there. So reach out if you need some help.
Yeah, guys, it's never too early to start, and you got to commit to part of the process. Brad's definitely one of the experts in it. It's a great website, super informative. You can find yourself getting lost in it. There's tons of information on there. Speaking of that, if you like what you're hearing today, please 5-star this podcast, review, share it with friends and family. This is a wonderful topic. It's hitting right home right now. We're going to have some graphs. We're going to have some charts, links to Brad's website, all on our YouTube channel. If you subscribe, you'll be able to get to those. Again, Brad, thanks for being on the show. It was great having you today. Really appreciate your time and expertise, and definitely enlightening myself and our audience on the college world and what we're all getting ready to face here over the next couple of years. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I got one more shot, I'm gonna make it. One more chance, I'm gonna take it. I meant it when I said it, now it's time for me to do it. I got one life to live, so I put my all into it, yeah.